What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here with a Banner Night recap episode of You Got Boston. I'm going to spend a little bit of time sharing some of the insights and just kind of what the experience was like to be in the building. And then obviously what we saw on the court as well, which I thought was perfectly fitting. I wrote a story for Celtics blog about how really the banner ceremony was kind of the perfect segue to the game. And the game was kind of a tutorial on why the banner was raised in the first place. So you can check that out. But really just an awesome experience. I've been watching the Celtics since I was a little kid, and I've never seen a banner ceremony. I actually started following the team like right after they won the championship. And so I missed that blip of time, 2008, 2009. And so it's been something that's been quite elusive to me as well. And a lot of the players talked about what the experience meant to them and what it was like to actually just be there in the moment, get their rings, see the banner kind of raise to the rafters, and then play the game and blow out the Knicks and almost break the three-point record for most three-pointers ever in an NBA game. And they did not break that record. And those of you that tuned in last night, assuming most of you saw how frustrating that's frustrating and hilarious, I would say, in one that scene was. And so I wanted to just start off by not the basketball piece, because the basketball we'll be talking about all year. And certainly the basketball piece is interesting and it's relevant here, but I thought the last night was bigger than basketball. The things that stood out to me the most was just how important it was for the current Celtics. The previous Celtics were in the house, Bob Cousy, Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, Cedric Maxwell, who's always in the building. And it was just those five. And, certainly you think they could have brought more. Like I was thinking, it would be nice to have more representation from the 80s team. But I don't think it really mattered. And I think just Bob Cousy's presence alone and the fact that he was on this team for, before Red Auerbach, this is a guy that really kind of spans the entire history of the Celtics organization. And having him be wheeled in there and he addressed the crowd and he, just kind of did the two peace signs. And he had said, he was interviewed a little while ago, he said, I really want to live to watch them win this championship. And then he said, I want to live to watch them win, actually see the banner get raised. So having him in the building, I thought was super cool. And it was something that both, the stars, Jason Tatum, Al Horford, Jaylen Brown, they talked about it. And then Joe Mazzulla, you could just tell it was the thing that was the most meaningful to him, was not winning the championship, was not his individual or even the team accomplishment, but more the franchise. And something that I'm going to ask Joe Mazzulla about next time we have practice, which won't be for a little bit of time because the Celtics are hitting the road now, is what it would be like for him to coach a team that he didn't have these like deep-rooted ties to. Like he grew up a Celtics fan. He grew up in Rhode Island. He's in love with the organization. He finds the whole thing very kind of spiritual. He kissed the parquet when it was his time to get the ring. And so that was pretty unique. I didn't know what to expect. A lot of people I saw were saying that they thought that he was going for push-ups. I would not have been surprised if that's what he was doing, but he said he kissed the parquet because he can't go out there and dive on the floor and grab loose balls the way that other players do. And so the way that the players do as the coach, he's just on the sideline. And so for him, it was a way to kind of feel like he was really a part of things. And he had a really beautiful presser, I would say. He's just been on fire. Okay. I'm in a different room in my house because I got a lot of complaints about the shoes being in the background. So if I cut out a Wi-Fi, it's because I tried a different part of my house that I'm not usually in. So next time I'll go back to my bedroom. Not in Brockton, I live in Cambridge. But still, one Wi-Fi box, 4 rooms, sometimes I can't go everywhere. But right now it looks like we're back in business. So yeah, I just think that the Joe's like spiritual connection to the Celtics and the fact that he is, grew up a fan, grew up so connected to the team, really believes that the Celtics are a way of life. Like, I don't know what it would be like for him if he was the coach of a regular organization. Like if he had just, as things had lined up, if he got a job offer in any, the Wizards, like some team that doesn't have the storied history, I wonder how he would relate to it, because so much of what he preaches and what he talks about is his connection to the Garden, his connection to the building, to the history, to the legends. And so it's just a perfect fit. And it's honestly something that's, it's hard for me to imagine. I've only ever covered this team as far as NBA teams go. And so I can't really imagine what it would be like to cover a team that didn't have that storied history. But for him, he's coaching this organization, like it's completely different. And so I thought that was just a beautiful night. I had my dad and my brother there who don't usually go to games, and it was really nice to see them and really nice to see them be in the building. And then I was also really glad that the game itself was so enjoyable, because in my family, blowouts are considered enjoyable. I know some people want to see it go down to the wire, but I thought that on the eve of the championship the championship, rings and the banner raising and all of that, I thought that it was really special that, then they go out and they blow out the Knicks, and that Jason Tatum in particular, who has been the subject of so much controversy, and he's been the subject of so much discourse around whether he could still shoot and whether he's good at basketball still. And I thought that his just reputation was just so unfairly denigrated this past summer after helping lead this team to a championship. He comes out and has the best opening night performance I think we've seen in years. 37 points on 14 of 18 shooting, 8 of 11 from three. And then he obviously also has the 10 assists and 1 turnover, which I thought was like maybe the most remarkable part of the stat line. Only played 30 minutes, and certainly with 18 minutes, 18 shots, he definitely could have taken more, but he just wasn't forcing the issue, and that's what was making him so effective. And so all of that stood out to me. I thought the Tatum's performance was kind of the fitting bow on that night. And so you have both the championship celebrations, you have all the emotions that come with that, and then you have the big game starts, and it's like the show is just beginning now. Tatum from the jump was feeling it. He hits the first shot of the game. And I will say I watched the game in person, and when I'm there in person, I'm talking to people. I'm watching, I'm looking at the bench because those are things you can't see later on. And then the actual game, you can always go back and watch on TV. And so I rewatched the game today, and what really stood out to me was like how different his shot actually looked. And I've been on this bandwagon of like, I'm not going to talk about his shot form because I really don't think it's my place. And I'm not an expert on shot mechanisms. And I've said this a couple times, but if you search my name on YouTube and basketball highlights, you can see my high school highlights, and you can understand why I don't like talking about people's shots. And so I just thought that when on a second watch, and I went back and looked at some of his film from the playoffs, like there is a clear, noticeable lack of a hitch. And I know everybody's been talking about it, but it's true. And so I don't think he's going to be 8 for 11 on a regular night. That's a pretty absurd stat line to begin with. And he's not going to go 8 for 11 most nights, but if he can make 5 for 11, like that's a jump up from what we were seeing in the postseason. And I do think that he's going to be more consistent now. And so I'm going to continue sharing just some of my thoughts and observations from this kind of really a beautiful emotional ceremony and the subsequent game, and also just from training camp and just being around the team these past few weeks. I've been busy covering the WNBA finals, but then also Celtics preseason and training camp, and now things are going to slow down a little bit. But I've also been around and talking to Joe and talking to the players. And so happy to shed light on anything that people are wondering as well. So feel free to put questions in the chat box. And if you're watching this on a rewatch, feel free to put questions in the YouTube comments, and I'll respond to those accordingly as well. And just a quick moment before we continue on here, I just want to send a quick message from our friends over at Game Time. There's few things I prefer doing than attending an NBA game or sporting event live, and you can purchase tickets to Celtics games or any other sporting event, concert, or show with Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. It filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. With Game Time, you can actually see the view of the court or stage from the seat that you choose to purchase, and you can buy tickets with just one click. There are lots of cool features. There's a lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, or theater. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. And I actually use Game Time to buy my dad and brother tickets. And the cool thing is you can kind of look and check every single day, and that's what I was doing, and I got it on the cheapest day, so I was happy with that. But I'm just going to scroll through here. I appreciate those of you tuning in live. I know it's kind of an awkward hour. I'm going to kind of test out different hours and see what's most popular here. And this show will be mostly on off days. So as you guys those of you that follow CLNS, you can find my post-game coverage on the Garden Report. Right after games, we go live. And then usually Bobby Manning and I will do a stand-up as well for the morning. And so this is kind of an off day thing. And so as long as you all are kind of looking for coverage, looking for further analysis, you're able to tune in on days when the Celtics aren't playing, and we'll have a live show to kind of discuss the previous games and answer any questions that have come up. And also, I'm always happy to, if there's things you guys want me to look into, like I'm happy to ask questions and kind of go that way as well. I think that sometimes you guys probably watch pressers and you're like, why are all these questions so bad? Because honestly, it is hard to come up with unique questions that are also fitting for the moment. So it's like a lot of times I have questions I'd love to ask, but they just don't fit the context. And like you have to think about the implications of what you're asking as well. But if there's anything that you guys are curious about, I'm always happy to kind of poke around and see if I can get answers. My intention as a reporter for this team is to be able to kind of be a segue between like the team and things that are happening on the ground and the fan base. And so that's kind of how I view this position. And I'm really grateful to be in this role and to be able to do that. And so I'm seeing a question here was a couple of times asked about the Knicks and about whether the Knicks were the Knicks just not physically ready as Celtics for the new season, or are we just that good? So this is an interesting question, and it's one we discuss a little bit on the Garden Report. I really do think that this Celtics team is in the beginning of a dynasty, or maybe I should say in the middle of a dynasty, because they've already won a championship. I had that feeling last night when I was sitting in the Garden, and it wasn't just that they were hitting everything, which like obviously that's always going to make teams look good. It was just, I was thinking like, what teams in this league have the personnel to match up from a shooting standpoint, to be able to get off as many threes with so many weapons, and then also have no defenders on the floor that are attackable, really. Like even Sam Hauser, I know he's the guy that he gets picked on. Like as far as I'm concerned, teams to pick on Sam Hauser all day, and like I don't think that that's a helpful defense, and the numbers would back me up there. And so when you're watching this team, it does feel like you're watching a historically great team, and it did last year as well. But now it's like you have the validation of the championship banner hanging. You know, it's not speculative anymore. It's not what they could end up being. It's like what they've already shown that they are. On the flip side, you have a Knicks team that I think has a lot of hype, and it's because they were involved in a couple of major trades this summer. One was for Mikal Bridges, and it's the 5 first-round picks and all the buzz around that. And then the other one was trading Julius Randle and Donte DiVincenzo for Karl-Anthony Towns. And both of these trades, I feel like kind of conflicted about. I didn't have an obvious like, okay, this is obvious. This is who the winner was. This is who the loser was. The Karl-Anthony Towns, Julius Randle one, I was particularly conflicted about because I'm not a huge fan of either of those two players. But I think that the key in that one is the Donte DiVincenzo bit, and he's in Minnesota, and he's going to be a loss for New York because he really emerged as a superstar in the playoffs last year. And so what I realized watching the Knicks, and this might be like kind of obvious, but we were all excited about this team because they were already a pretty magical team last year, and then they have these new pieces that could elevate them to the next level. But in reality, I do think that two of the most important pieces to why they were this magical team are gone now, and that's Isaiah Hartenstein and Donte DiVincenzo. And Julius Randle just wasn't a part of that playoff run, and I also don't think that he's really ever fit with that team as well. So it's just, I think it's more of an indictment on like how important those other guys were, and maybe in the analysis around this team and all that they were gaining, there was also like a little bit of overlooking on what they were losing. And so, yeah, it's kind of a weird situation because watching this team yesterday, it didn't seem like they knew who they were. They didn't have a clear identity. Obviously, the Celtics were coming out guns blazing. It was going to be really hard to beat them regardless. Josh Hart said, you know, these dudes need to be drug tested. Like, I thought that was a funny quote. He always is good for a good quote, but it really did look like this team is playing out of their mind. But that aside, like, I don't know how they were using Karl-Anthony Towns. It wasn't quite clear to me what the intention was, why they were using him mostly as not really a spacer when like that's really what he can bring. And then besides for that, like Jalen Brunson is a guy who I think is enormously talented, somebody that I'm personally a huge fan of. But also, like, he has to find a way to play great one-on-one basketball, which is what he can always do, and also make sure that the team's offense and everybody's involved and kind of maximized. And they're going to figure it out to a better extent than they did last night. But I also think that watching them, we did jump the gun a little bit on kind of saying what this team was capable of doing and what this team was, you know, what this team had accomplished and how that would reflect into this year. Because this is the same thing as last year. You know, the Celtics got rid of Marcus Smart and Rob Williams, and yeah, I think like, that trade ended up working out obviously, but there's a question mark around how that's going to go. And usually when you assemble a new team and grab a new pieces in the offseason, usually you don't win that year. The Celtics, what they did last year was unusual. It's much more common to see what happened with the Phoenix Suns, where there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of momentum, and you get Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and these guys together and Bradley Beal, and then you don't win. That's the blueprint for how it usually goes. And so I do think I'm a little bit lower on New York, not because I saw something last night that was so alarming, because in reality, like, last night was just one game, but because I think last night served as a really helpful reminder that the identity of this team is completely different than what it once was. That's just my perspective. I like New York. I hope they're good this year, because I think that it's always fun when Boston and New York are good. I'll be at the games in Brooklyn and in Madison Square Garden, and I want to see good battles. But certainly, I think that if you're a Celtics fan, Jaylen Brown was asked if he was like worried about the Knicks by Stephen A. Smith when he did their sit down, and he said, like, I'm not worried. And I don't think that they have reason to be worried right now. Just going to acknowledge some of these comments. I do think this was about Tatum. Tatum looked much more decisive and confident. Comment here about Derrick White. Derrick White's defense was phenomenal. I also thought Derrick White's offense was phenomenal, and he's just one of those guys that kind of goes underrated, under the radar. Last night he had 24 points. He was, Tatum was hot, but Derrick White was also really hot and was also really efficient. And I think that that's a great sign, because he had such a positive year last year that you want to make sure that that's not a one-off, and that in reality, like, he's going to do this again and again. And certainly I think what you saw from Derrick White is the confidence of the guy that helped them win a championship last year, the guy that scored 38 versus Miami in the first round. And so on both ends of the floor, Derrick White is so important to this team. He can create his own shot. He's a good facilitator, and he also doesn't need his. And that's really what's so important. And we talked about that a little on the Garden Report as well, but this idea that if you can be versatile and also like provide when you need to, but you also don't need to always be providing, is just so helpful, because there's so much on this team. So I'm going to continue going down here. This is a good question. A question about O'Shea getting his ring. Any news on how O'Shea will get his ring? I know Steve will get his in March when the Jazz play the Celtics. So I actually don't know. I don't know what O'Shea's plans are. I've loosely heard that there's a good chance that he might end up in Europe. I follow along on his vlog and his YouTube and everything, and there hasn't been any real insight, but certainly at this point of the year, if you're not on an NBA roster, the odds are that you're probably not going to be on an NBA roster. There's going to be some guys that break out of that, but the odds are against you at this point. And so unless there's something substantial that I'm missing that, would change my perspective here, I do think that the decision to opt out of his player option this year, that would have been a minimum contract, guaranteed money on the Celtics, it didn't age well, and probably it was the wrong choice. But also, I'm looking at this from a perspective of somebody that doesn't have the full picture, so I want to disclaim that. But I was thinking to myself, he's on a team. He could have been there last night to retrieve his ring and to be a part of the ceremony and everything. I don't know what the precedent is for a player who's like retired or just out of the league altogether. I'd have to look into that, but it did cross my mind, like, he's somebody that could just be here, because it's not like he's on another roster right now, and that's why he's not able to be here. And so I don't know. I can poke around and ask, and I'll report out if I find out anything about what the plans are for him. I did see that Svi tweeted last night, like, does anybody have a connection at UPS? Insinuating that he wanted his ring shipped out to him as fast as possible, but he'll get his ring only in March, really late in the season is the first time. It was the only time that Utah comes to Boston. But happy for Svi that he got a multi-year deal on the Jazz, and I'm sure he'll be a good rotation player there. Yeah, this is a comment about Tatum slowing down the game. I think absolutely, like, I talked about this last night, but really, like, above the shooting, it's the process and it's the decision making, and that's the things that can carry on from night to night. It doesn't have to change just because a shot's not falling. And last night it was just so automatic. It was really, really helpful to see. And then, yeah, just the ball movement. Like, I don't know that you can find another team that has the ball movement that the Celtics do, and the personnel to execute upon, like, what they're trying to accomplish. I agree that OKC, a lot of people right now have OKC as the biggest threat in the West. It almost feels like an unoriginal pick, but the signs certainly point there, because they were so promising last year. And I love what they did this offseason. Unlike the Knicks, where there was a give and take, I actually feel like for them, the additions of Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein, like, are just huge. And then Josh Giddey, who exited, went to Chicago. I didn't think he fit that team. I don't think he really elevated what they were able to do. And so yeah, that's kind of my perspective on that. And we'll always see it. Sometimes these teams have a really good season. The Wolves didn't all look great last night after a great regular season last year. And so we'll see how that goes. It's just one game, but just because you have one good year doesn't mean that that's sustained success. So I don't want to get carried away with OKC. I'm already hearing people say like they're the next dynasty or whatnot. But yeah, certainly I think in this position, in this moment, in this position, you just have to be optimistic about that group and where that organization is headed. Okay, question about what do you think are the main challenges for the team this season? I think health, and not because they're particularly unhealthy, but just because it's an existential challenge in the NBA. I mean, how many teams last year did we see enter the playoffs and we're just missing one of their key players, or multiple of their key players? And so, yeah, it's super bizarre, what's going on right now. Even in the preseason, I felt like there was more injuries than usual. And I don't know if that's statistically accurate, but it feels like it's just totally changing the landscape of the NBA. And they were healthy last year outside of Kristaps Porzingis. And so being able to replicate that health will be so important. And also just being able to reintegrate Porzingis when he comes back. Like, I think this team without him is really good. And they showed that last year in the playoffs. And so figuring out like how to deal with that kind of in and out of the rotation, like that's really the biggest challenge for me. I don't think there's going to be a mental thing. I know people are going to ask about, whether mentally they're going to get bored if they're winning a lot. Like, I think we got to move on from that narrative because it's just not what we're seeing. It's not what we're hearing. And so I have all the reasons in the world to think that that's not this team's DNA. It's not the culture around this organization. They're going to stay locked in. And so I'm really looking at it from a more from that sense of just like, can you replicate the success you had just from being available last year? Okay, this is a good question. What do you think will be our best sixth man this year? I think the top sixth man will be, assuming that Al Horford starts like half the season. I'm going to consider him a starter because he's going to end up starting quite a bit. So outside of Al, probably Sam Hauser. I think he's just been consistently a really elite scorer off the bench. And he just seems super comfortable in preseason, the regular season. It's close between him and Pritchard. They've both shown that they can create, and I think they're both kind of due for bigger leaps right now. But yeah, I would say probably Sam Hauser is the one that I'm the most optimistic about. And then the second half of your question, is there a reality where we re-sign Lonnie Walker? I do think the Celtics would be interested in him. I've kind of poked around. I haven't heard any confirmation about whether or not he'll be on that main Celtics team. That roster will be finalized by the end of this weekend. And so keep your eyes out for information around that. Most of that team is going to be a lot of two-ways. So Anton Watson, Baylor Schreiman will be there, even though he's not a two-way. J.D. Davison, Drew Peterson, those guys will be in Maine. And then whether or not Lonnie Walker goes is anybody's guess right now. He's not going to be signed by the Celtics right now. And from what I'm hearing, he hasn't been picked up by anybody. So if that's a guess, I would guess that he's going to be in Maine to begin. But I don't think that he's officially made that decision, or at least it's all public. And I'm going to take a break from answering. Feel free to continue putting these in, but I'm going to just jump in and just have a message from my friends over at PrizePicks.
PrizePicks is the best way to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You can just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. You can now win 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineups stay in play. So even if one of your players gets injured, if your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, PrizePicks keeps your lineup live. PrizePicks also invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinion into real money all season long on PrizePicks. I'll be looking to make some picks ahead of NBA opening night next week. In the meantime, download your app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game.
So sorry about if my video is freezing in and out. I tried to switch to my hotspot. It's just because I'm in a different part of my house than usual. So I won't go here again, even though I think the background's a little bit less distracting. But I appreciate everybody for bearing with me here. I see there's a lot of new comments and questions here while I was kind of catching up on these, so I'm going to try to go through these quickly. And then I'll do another show probably on Friday since that's another Celtics off day. Okay, so yeah, just some comments on Josh Hart. I resonate with these. Josh Hart looked uncomfortable. He talked about it in preseason that he looked uncomfortable. Karl Anthony Towns agreed that they kind of weren't really leveraging him as much as he probably will end up being leveraged. And then yeah, certainly the Knicks lost some physicality. Like Hart, Randall, those are two of the guys that were kind of some of their enforcers. So we'll see on all that. Seeing a couple of Lonnie Walker related questions, and as I just said, I'm not sure exactly what the situation is going to look like for him. I would love to see him in Maine personally because covering games in Maine are awesome. I think the fans in Portland would be really excited to have him there, as clearly the fans here are just so excited about him in general. And then I think that it gives him a chance to be on an NBA team. From my experience talking to players that are overseas, like it's just a lot harder to come back to the NBA once you've already made that move overseas. Like you're kind of viewed as an overseas player at that point. And so yeah, all that being said, I'm optimistic that Lonnie Walker will find a spot in the league. I think that he's talented enough. I think that he's skilled enough. I think that he seems like a great guy and maybe just hasn't been able to kind of string together the kind of success or commitment or whatever else it is so far in his career. But I'm a believer. Maybe I'll be wrong. Sometimes I get excited about these guys that can score effectively and just seem like nice guys overall. So maybe I'm being biased here, but I hope that he can find a spot. And, whether or not it's in Boston, TBD. Right now, it looks unlikely to be in Boston, at least in the short-term future. But we'll report out anything that I learn about that situation, and we'll see. I'm seeing some comments here. Yeah, the banner ceremony was absolutely awesome. I thought that it was just great. The only thing that I did see people complaining about, which honestly, like I did think that in real life, was that the banner was wrinkled. I don't know if you guys noticed that on the TV. It really did look like the banner was wrinkled. So it was kind of weird. And I have to imagine that they maybe didn't realize, or they're going to iron it now or whatever. But if you look at I was choosing the feature photo for my story, and I was like, okay, this is kind of wild that legitimately all the photos have a wrinkled banner in them. So not the end of the world, but that was the one complaint that I saw prevalent online. Being there in the moment, all I could think about was just I can't believe this is really happening. Watching the players' reaction, the coach's reaction, just the fans going insane. I actually wasn't sitting on press row for that. I went to a balcony section where there was a better view. And so was talking to some fans there who were just super emotional, couldn't believe that it was really happening. So yeah. And then obviously there was this whole situation with the 30th 3-pointer. With 8 minutes and 30 seconds to go, the Celtics had 29 threes, which was pretty insane. And they needed one more to break the all-time record for most 3-pointers in a single game. And normally, I don't know that the crowd would have cared that much about that record, but it's Banner Night, and they just won the championship, and it's their first game of the season, and everything was kind of perfect. Tatum was on fire. Everybody was there. It was just kind of this perfect sequence of events where it just kept getting better and better. And then they were about to break this record, which would have been kind of the cherry on top. I already know from a writing standpoint, how easy that story would have been to tell of the manifestation of Mazzulla Ball in this record and all that. And then they missed 13 in a row. And it was kind of hilarious to watch because they were getting clean looks, but they were also taking unnatural shots because there were points in time where Pritchard and Jordan Walsh, they were getting rebounds. They were just kicking them out. They were down by 3. That was the energy. It was a down by 3 clock winding down type of situation. And yeah, they could not hit. It was Pritchard, it was Hauser, Jordan Walsh got in there with an air ball, Xavier Tillman got in there with an air ball. So it was kind of a brutal watch. The crowd is freaking out. They just want them to shoot. And then they dribbled out the clock at the end, and the crowd started booing as they realized they weren't going to take a final attempt. And that was kind of the cherry on top of just kind of capturing this Boston crowd. Sam Hauser joked about a post game of this is pretty wild that we're up by 30 in the banner ceremony and this crowd is cheering as he's booing us. So, that's just the way that it goes. But I thought that it was kind of a, Jaylen Brown talked about a post game, this is kind of what happens when you start to force things, it jinxed us a little bit. So yeah, I thought it was an interesting sub story there. I wish someone had asked Joe about how he felt about that whole record chasing moment. Maybe someone will ask in practice. I can ask him in practice. But really the post games were all about the banner ceremony and just kind of the experience of that, less so about the game itself. Like nobody really talked about how like Drew Holiday was on Karl-Anthony Towns for a while and how effective that was and all those things. So yeah, and this is a great point. They left Missoula ball and went off on their own. Absolutely. They were good looks, but the basketball guys decided it was not the night. And I think that a little bit of that was just idea that like they were good looks, but they also were like not the right process in a way. And I think that it was more of like it really was like a basketball gods moment. I hate to say that, but I really did feel that way. So, and then, yeah, someone here said was talking about earlier about injuries. Like, didn't we not have Drew for a while? Drew missed, I don't know off the top of my head, and I'm worried about my Wi-Fi right now, so I'm not going to search, but I don't know off the top of my head how many games Drew missed, but I don't think it was a lot. I would guess he probably missed 15 games last season. So I'm talking about like really more substantial things. Drew was available. He had a dead arm, I think, for a second, then he had an ankle sprain here and there. Oh, this is cool. Somebody here from Latvia. Oh, I'm sorry about this, guys. I saw people were complaining on TNT about why did they cut the commercial at the moment when the banner was raised. I did not realize, first of all, that TNT was the only media company broadcasting this. I thought it was also on the local channel. So I didn't realize that was the situation. But then also, I could not believe when I watched the Twitter replay and the banner is literally raising and they cut away from it into commercial break. It's like you'd think that the one rule that the producers had going into the night was we're going to play the whole ceremony, like just play it through and then go to commercial. So I was pretty stunned by that. Hopefully you can find, I think, a couple different places. CLNS has like on YouTube the full banner ceremony. So if you want to watch like a more uncut version, sometimes it's cool to watch that. It's not going to be like as professionally cut, but it's going to have the actual unfiltered order of events. We have the same thing up there from like the finals and the Eastern Conference finals. And I think those are worth seeing, honestly. But yeah, it's really disappointing to see that. So sorry for everybody that was watching on TV and had to cut away from it. Hopefully Twitter was useful to you in the moment. Okay, and I'm seeing some people here resonating with the wrinkled banner comment. So we shall see if they do anything about that. I'll see if I hear anything around the facilities. It's like a joking matter. I don't think anybody really actually cares much, but it is pretty funny that it was a very overt thing. Like it looked like when I try to look on, I don't iron my clothes usually, and sometimes I'm just like, oh, okay, hopefully this is not as obvious. And it's like obviously it is obvious, and this was kind of the situation with this banner. Yeah, and then sorry that the media coverage was not great on TV. I have one video that I posted that I thought was just the best part of the night, and it was when they went back and they showed how every single player ended up in Boston that was like of the key players. So they had the original trade that got them the draft picks that became Tatum and Brown, and then they had Tatum's draft night and Jalen's draft night, and then the trades that landed Al Horford back and bringing Drew Holiday and Porzingis, and each one of those was like cutaways from the TV and the announcing and the Sports Center news, and then when you saw who the player was, like the crowd was going wild. And so for me, like I do get chills quite a bit just being around the Celtics and being around basketball, and same for the WNBA finals and everything. But this was one of those moments where I was like, holy shit, like this is incredible that this was like a journey that I was following for so many years, and we all were, and then now you're seeing that translate into the banner raising. And like this, it sometimes feels like, okay, like especially when I'm doing my job, I'm like, I gotta get my story out, I gotta get my tweets out, I'm like getting my interview in, and I had this moment of like, this is like such a storybook finish to what was a very up and down 7 years, and that's kind of what makes it more beautiful. I think if it was one of those things where it was just like from the beginning everything was really easy, then you just wouldn't mean as much. And so showing all the times they came short, I thought that was really special. You can find that tweet on my Twitter. Trying to think what it was called. I can't remember, but I can post it in the comments of this video as well, so you guys can see it later. But it was super, super cool just to kind of see that. And I wish there was a way to get all those videos that were on the Jumbotron like out somewhere, the actual videos, because I'm taking a video of them, and I was getting like moved around. But yeah, it was pretty cool. Okay, and then I did not see that JB dropped the top part of his ring or almost dropped it. I did see that he was making fun of Tatum at one point for saying the "we did it" comment. Like I saw that he was saying it in the background of Tatum making his speech, and then Drew started laughing and jumping up and down. So that was pretty funny. It gives you a little bit of insight into like the way they kind of make fun of each other or their relationship. So that was pretty cool as well. And then, yeah, for sure, these are comments about the 3-point shooting. Like they definitely were pressing. And I'm seeing people are recognizing, okay, yeah, so this was emotional for people. Like, I think that video really hit everybody that kind of watched. It did have this kind of coming of age feel, certainly. And yeah, and then I know the TNT crew was in Boston. So if you're in Boston, maybe you saw them at City Plaza. I didn't make my way over there. I was going to, and then I realized that it was too close in time to when all the Celtics pregame things were happening. And Joe Mazzulla was speaking earlier, and I wanted to kind of watch all of that. But that being said, I thought that the night as a whole, just you couldn't have asked for a better sequence of events. The fact that it was not just a win, but it was a resounding one. The fact that Jason Tatum had such a spectacular game. The fact that all of the winners, pretty much, with the exception of 2 guys that we've talked about, were in the building and they were there and retrieved their ring. Like, it's so much more fulfilling that way. I was thinking, like, after the Raptors won in 2019, the following year in the ring, Kawhi Leonard, he's not there. And so those things are just so, it changes the complexion of like the entire event, and the fact that all those guys are not only there, but they're there and they're looking to do this again. And Tatum said afterwards, like, I had a whole speech prepared and I was going to say it. And then instead I kind of was like, the crowd was so excited and I said, fuck it, let's do it again. And so I thought that whole experience and kind of how he really went off the cuff at that point. And it was just clear, you're not supposed to talk about repeating on this team. It's been very clear. Nobody's talking about it. But instead, his emotions kind of kicked in. And I think everybody's thinking it. Everybody's thinking, everybody that was there, I was talking to a lot of kind of fans around, other reporters, everybody has this feeling that this team is going to do it again, that this is not just like the team won a championship and, maybe they'll be good again. Like, you have this energy of like something really special is brewing in front of us. And honestly, I'm just so grateful that my journalism career is overlapping with that, because I have a feeling that when it's all said and done, this is going to be an all-time great team, and it's going to be a historic couple of years here in Boston. And the fact that I get to cover it, I'm super grateful for. And you guys should all be grateful you get to watch and tune in, because I think like people can be fans of teams for 30 years and not ever see the heights that this team has already achieved. And so it's just so special and it's so fun. And also just, I think the players themselves make this team so fun to follow and to cover, because you really are just focusing on basketball. You don't have to deal with like off-court things or things like that. So it just makes the job easier. My plan over the next couple of weeks is I'm going to be covering these next few games from home. There were some of these away games that I'm hitting the road for the next couple of road trips. And so please do subscribe to You Got Boston. I'm going to do these as much as possible on days where I'm not doing the post-game show, just because the post-game show is very long. And so by that point, I have no more words to say. But, days where there are not games, sometimes I'll do these from practice as well. And as I said, feel free to message me if there's things you want me to look into. I am still thinking about how to do like a fan episode where we have people call in or join or whatever else. And then also, if there are questions or things that you kind of want me to look into, I'm happy to look into those as well. But I really do appreciate everybody for tuning in. It's been super fun to be able to kind of talk about this team. I mostly now do it for CLNS, and so you can check out the Garden Report, check out all of the pressers on CLNS as well. And then you can check out my writing on sbnation.com and Celtics blog. I have a new story out on Celtics blog today about kind of Banner Night and a lot of what I talked about today. But thanks everybody for tuning in. I know it's kind of a little bit of a weird hour, but I appreciate it. And I wish you all the best weeks moving forward. And we'll have some post-game coverage tomorrow after Celtics Wizards.